This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. My guest is David Wilson, CEO at energy system and market software provider Energy Exemplar. He's going to describe the just announced new investments in the $500 billion Stargate data center project. Surging electricity demand AI data centers are driving everywhere, and the power system impacts that demand could have. David began his now over 3-decade career as a field engineer and an engineering team manager with major energy sector companies, including GE Power, Westinghouse, and Schlumberger. He then held senior leadership positions with McKinsey and Company before becoming CEO of Energy Exemplar almost 8 years ago. So, David, first, let's start. Can you give us an overview and short history of the Stargate project, where its funding comes from, the companies behind it, that sort of thing?
Sure. Well, Stargate's relatively fresh. It was announced early in 25 January, in fact, and with really a what seemed at the time to be a truly aspirational goal of deploying $500 billion and using 10 gigawatts of energy to build state-of-the-art AI infrastructure in the US. And there was a consortium, if you will, of OpenAI with major partners, including Oracle, who were looking at the sites and cloud infrastructure, SoftBank, who's was more on the financing side, and NVIDIA with the chips and also a strategic investment. So they were the major players, and it was originally announced at that time around a site in Texas, which is since that time the planning has moved on materially, and that site's starting to progress. And then recently, actually recently I've been dealing with several of the developers who are working on that project, so I can say that there's a huge amount of effort going into bringing that initial site to life right now.
Interesting. So Stargate just announced that there's 5 data center sites representing 7 gigawatts of new capacity and investments of over $400 billion. That's the new investment over the next 3 years. That's a lot of money in a short amount of time, even for this new AI economy that we have. Tell us a little bit more about what is in that announcement and how it's going to advance US AI capabilities.
Yeah, so the new announcement it fits under that initial announcement of 10 gigawatts. This is a 7 gigawatts of that deployment, if you will, and it's across multiple sites. So some more in Texas. They're also expanding out into New Mexico, Ohio, and a yet to be named Midwest site. And this really comes back to that original partnership. So Oracle is developing 3 of these sites, and SoftBank is going to back 2 of them. So this is a material amount of investment, obviously in the AI space, but it's also a material amount of energy. So 7 gigawatts, and sort of a way to think about this in rough terms is a gigawatt is a large nuclear power plant. So this is the 7 large nuclear facilities. So just to sort of touch on the AI piece, this will materially boost the available AI compute capacity in the US. But it's not the only project out there, actually. If you look at what's been announced across AI data centers in the US, which is over 90 gigawatts of projects have been announced. It's a little hard to say whether they'll all progress, but this would be just under 10% of the total data center announcements, or the public announcements. So this sector is moving very, very fast. And to put that into context, today, the US's energy consumption, about 4% of that goes to data centers. And the forecast range is that by as soon as 2028, this could be in that 10 to 12% range of domestic energy consumption, which is materially higher than the global average forecast. It really is going to have a material impact on US energy markets. And
Yeah.
while
Yeah.
these facilities are relatively fast to build, and the timing around these projects shows that you can stand up and develop these mega projects relatively quickly, the energy side of it tends to be a little slower.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to ask you, would you care to advance? It's a very controversial area, but would you care to advance your thoughts about how much of that projected um, growth, 90 gigawatts of capacity demand from AI data centers, I think is what you said. Maybe you want to clarify that if I got it wrong. But how much of that is going to actually materialize? Because a lot of people talk about how the urgency to build data centers is so great that some of these companies are running around the country uh, projecting possible projects in a lot of different places so that they can get that one that they need. Do you think that's what's happening, and or how much do you think we're going to see of that?
Yeah, and so I'll sort of expand on that in a couple of ways. So the first one is there's a huge amount of new load being applications coming into the grid. And so if I look at Texas, it's currently got I think it's around 180 gigawatts of things in the queue, of which data centers are a material part of that. But the reason why this is so, I guess, shocking in a sense for the energy sector is that the largest ever load on the Texas grid has been about 80 something gigawatts, right? So the queue is multiple times bigger than the historic loads ever been. And so that's the extreme case of what's happening in the US. And it's a big a lot of robust debate. I think it would be fair to say around how much of this is real, how much of this is speculative. Is it a bubble? Is it the multiple sites that you get that you sort of raised? And there's no doubt that there is some of that, but regardless, this is a step change from what the energy sectors looked like in the US for the last few decades, where loads grown a percent or two a year. This is a sudden step change, and we did get very used to while there was more electrification and more loads added. We also had the offsetting efficiency gains, simple things like LEDs or heat pumps. All these net they kind of let us electrify more without materially more load on the grid. This is a sudden and really unforeseen step change in demand growth on the grids all across the US.
Yeah, there was a debate in the power sector in the good old days, by which I mean last year,
Yes.
um, about electrification for buildings and transportation being a burden on the system. And now that's just an afterthought almost. But Stargate is about the need for US data center capacity to keep pace with the competition from China in the use of artificial intelligence. That data center growth is driving this new demand for electricity. There have been proposals for new generation at different being deployed in different ways, new rate designs, and new relationships between these hyperscalers and the power providers. Can all that see this momentum building that will meet that demand that these data centers are starting to show? And what kind of impacts do you see on the power system and on consumer electricity bills of that demand? I mean, maybe we can go into that for you after you answer the first question. Do you think that these new ideas will meet that demand?
Yeah, it's actually a very hot topic at the minute, and there's a few reasons for that. Similar to the last question, just how much demand is real? So how much do you actually need to build? At the same time, there's been a lot of the hyperscalers have made a net zero commitment, so they're actually looking to meet these needs over time in a carbon neutral way, which is a controversial topic of its own. And then you're facing some structural challenges in the industry. And so the sort of first one of those is we've got some changing policy landscapes at the minute, which mean both current and future renewable projects are facing a much tougher pathway to getting built than they were in the past. And so they're often the fastest projects to deploy with the lowest cost of energy. So that's an interesting dynamic of itself. The fossil fuel vendors really reached the production bottlenecks for things like gas turbines. Like you can't actually go out and buy a gas turbine today in North America. The
All kinds
production queue's full.
all kinds of supply chain problems for the
That
natural gas industry.
that's right. So what may have seemed like a silver bullet there, and is not quite as simple as it seems. And I don't want to bet against the ability of some of these organisations to ramp up their supply chains, but they are challenges. They are very large capital commitments to do that. So they'll also be weighing this question of how much of this future demand is real as they make those commitments. And I think, several of us have been around through a few technology booms and a few energy demand booms to know that the rug can get pulled out quite quickly. So, but that said, AI feels very material and very, very real. And then the other piece that's been touted a lot is nuclear, but the practical reality is there hasn't yet been a nuclear renaissance. We've had life extensions of existing plants. We've had some plants that were partially built get committed to completion, and there's been announcements around small modular reactors, but there's none actually built yet, right? And so I just want to be a bit pragmatic around the nuclear renaissance yet. And even if people push the go button on that, it takes many years and historically decades to get nuclear plants online. So there is a material challenge in serving the energy needs that have been getting announced at the minute. And lots of players are stepping up and looking at ways to do this, but it is a huge challenge, and the pathway to that amount of energy is not entirely clear yet.
There is a lot of concern about the need to build generation, transmission, distribution systems to meet this demand. And those costs could impact consumers' electricity bills. There is some light on the horizon there, because a lot of regulators are building new or approving new rate designs that will require the hyperscalers to carry a lot of that burden. But the other part of that question, and it's the last question I want to discuss with you, David, is this talk about flexibility. There's a lot of talk about flexibility. Um, there's a big report from Duke University Nicholas Institute. It says that if hyperscalers, if these data centers can curtail or limit their usage during certain periods of the day, fairly short periods of the day, it could free up a lot of opportunity to meet that demand that they have. And there's another question, which is a lot of people are saying that the flexibility of distributed energy resources like rooftop solar and storage and uh, batteries of other kinds and electric vehicles in virtual power plants could play a role. How do you see this potential for flexibility at the large end of the scale, that the demand from the data centers, and at the customer-owned resource end of the scale?
Yeah, I think this is a huge opportunity. And so maybe we'll reflect on how energy systems or electricity systems were designed in the past, and then the opportunities that the future, well, today and the future has for us. So in the past, it was pretty simple. We designed these systems to be able to handle basically everyone turning everything on at once. And we did that by building thicker and thicker cables. And as more loads were attached, you upsize the system, and that's ends up as being a very capital intensive way of solving these problems, because and the new way of thinking about this is, how do we orchestrate all of these different needs of the system and flexibilities and capacities of the systems. And so the nice piece is, in parallel with these complexities, if you will, of the systems, has been the rise in compute and the ability to automate.
If you want to hear the big last exchange of this terrific conversation, support the podcast by subscribing at just $2.99 per month to the Power Sector Podcast's Power More. With your subscription, you'll get both parts of the content delivered directly to you the second they drop.